Story 1. I discovered in my early 40s that I am the product of the rape of my teenage mother. A family member informed me of this a few months after my mother passed away at the age of 56. The two individuals who told me shared information they were not supposed to disclose, but they could not bear to keep the secret any longer. My mother went to her grave without wanting me to know this terrible truth about her or my origins. I grew up feeling loved and wanted, though I was definitely a surprised child, so I had no idea. I miss her greatly, and 6 years later, grief still takes my breath away. I wish she had told me, but I deeply respect how she raised me with love, not resentment or anger. Now, I am determined to find the person responsible, and if he is still alive, I will make him wish he was not. Story 2. I am 57 years old now, but when I was 17, I found a photo of myself as a 1-year-old in a playpen with a little girl of about 5 standing next to me. The photo was labeled with our names. I asked my sister who Marianne was, and she immediately had a pained look on her face. It turns out Marianne was our foster sister from 6 weeks old until my parents sent her away when she was almost 5. My siblings, who were 13, 12, 9, and 5, and I was 1, when she was sent away, were told to never mention her name again. And obviously, they didn't because I only found out about her from the photo. My brother, who was 5 when she was sent away, had nightmares for years that the lady in the big black car with the candy canes was going to come for him next. Apparently, the social services woman lured Marianne to the car with candy canes. Marianne was the lucky one who got to escape. I hope she ended up in a loving, stable home and had a great life. Story 3. My dad's birthday was October 5th, not December 5th, as he told everyone his whole life. That meant Grandma was pregnant when she and Grandpa got married. I discovered this when Dad passed away. He had hidden his driver's license and passport and celebrated his December birthday. Mom had already passed, but we have to assume she knew. Oh, the scandal. Story 4. My grandparents had a live-in male tenant whom we knew as Uncle when we were kids. Although it was never disclosed, I pieced together as an adult that he fathered at least 2 of my aunts and uncles with my grandmother. Story 5. At the age of 28, I discovered that I have a half-brother whom my mother gave up for adoption before marrying my father. I already had a half-sister from my father's first marriage, but I barely saw her. Unfortunately, neither sibling wanted anything to do with me. I was an only child and longed for a brother or sister. After my father passed away in 2018, I took a genetic ancestry test and found another half-sister that no one, not even my father, knew about. He had worked in another state during the summer before his senior year of high school, and the mother never contacted him to inform him that she was pregnant. This was in the early 1960s. I reached out to my new sister through the ancestry service, and she replied. That night, we spoke on the phone for 3 hours and felt an instant connection. Nearly 8 years later, we are very close. We are sisters. We have traveled to visit each other several times and communicate regularly. I am so happy to have her in my life. Story 6. Adults are just improvising. No one has it all figured out. As a child, I believed that grown-ups had all the answers. It turns out they are just experienced improvisers. Story 7. My dad had multiple affairs. I learned about one when I was about 15 but didn't realize there were others. About 13 years after he died, we discovered we have a half-brother who is 63 days older than me. He is now a big part of our lives. There is also at least one more half-sibling, but I haven't found her yet. Story 8. Uncle Jim, a good family friend on my mom's side who was always around during family gatherings, was actually my mom's first husband. She had been married before my dad. Story 9. My grandmother, who passed away when my mother was 13, did not die from natural causes. She died from a backyard abortion. Story 10. My cat did not run away. Instead, it was run over in the driveway while I was in the car. I was about 10 or 11 years old when this happened. Story 11. My grandfather was investigated by the school based on a random comment I made when I was 6 years old. Apparently, I mentioned something like he bounced me on his knee. It was completely untrue, but I felt guilty after they told me about it. This came up randomly during New Year's celebrations when I was about 20. Story 12. Adults are just kids who have lived longer. Don't get me wrong. Maturity is a real thing, and most people improve in this area as they age. Some mature earlier, while some unfortunately never do. Being an adult largely means understanding that your responsibilities, whatever they may be, come first. Despite this, we still retain our interests and hobbies. When I was a teenager, I enjoyed playing video games, watching cartoons, and playing tennis. I thought I would eventually age out of these activities. As a 32-year-old, I am still just as happy to play a video game, watch a cartoon, or go play tennis. The only difference is that I have less time to do so and have to be a bit more strategic about choosing when to indulge in leisure activities. Story 13. My parents got married in high school at ages 16 and 17 because my mother told my father she was pregnant. They married, divorced, and later had me. They married again but divorced once more. I did not learn about any of this until I became an adult. Story 14. We could have had money for necessities at times, but my mom always ensured she had money for alcohol. She said that to me on the phone not too long ago. I always made sure I had money for vodka. Story 15. I discovered in my early 20s that my mother and her second youngest sister were sexually abused by their father for many years. My cousin and I searched for years to understand the source of the mass paranoia and anxiety in our family. Eventually, her mother confided in her, and she shared it with me. My siblings, cousins, and I were all close to him, and now my entire childhood feels like a lie. No one reported him to the authorities. He claimed to have found God and was forgiven for his sins, I suppose. He is deceased now. Life is strange. Story 16. Setting boundaries and standing up for myself are life skills that everyone needs to learn. Not punishable offenses as my father raised me to believe. Story 17. Feeling like your body is not you and having episodes where you cry so hard you cannot breathe is called dissociation and panic attacks. Neither of them are things I am choosing to do, and therefore neither of them are things to be ashamed of. Instead, they are issues to be addressed. Story 18. I was good friends with the neighbor kids when I grew up. We used to go on holiday with them. However, around the time my parents divorced, they moved away, and I never heard from them again. I later learned as an adult that my mom cheated with the neighbor's dad, which resulted in the divorce and the neighbors moving. Story 19. It took me a surprisingly long time to realize that there was nothing supernatural about the Bermuda Triangle. Story 20. One grandfather was abusive to his children. I didn't realize how protected I had been every time we saw him, and we stopped seeing him after grandma was gone. Story 21. I was told my brother died due to his heart condition. However, I later found out the truth. His surgeon was intoxicated and caused my brother's death during the operation. Story 22. My family told me my dad was on a business trip when I was 6. I found out at 18 that he was actually in prison. I remember a little girl at church coming to me during that time and asking why my daddy was in jail. I thought it was so strange. Story 23. So many secrets. I still have no idea who my grandfather's grandparents were on my dad's side or what they were named. I'm Canadian, so they likely immigrated and possibly changed their last name. On my mom's side, each of my grandparents appears quite Caucasian. I thought my grandfather was just a bit more tanned because he was a farmer. It turns out they are both half indigenous and chose not to tell me. I should have guessed from my grandmother calling everyone a Weenuk, and the fact that the rest of the family is predominantly indigenous. I didn't know much about this when I was a kid, though. I figured it out when I was about 14. They grew up with discrimination and fear and decided to do their best to fit in. My father passed away 25 years ago. He was the love of my mother's life. They started dating when she was 14 and he was 16. High school sweethearts, you could say. 3 years ago, his identical twin, my uncle, messaged me and said he needed to talk to my brother and me in person. I was afraid his twin was going to tell us he was dying. Turns out I have a half-sister. I knew the timeline of my parents' relationship, and if there wasn't cheating involved, my direct response was, "Wow, she must be at least 10 years older than me." And I was right. She is 10 years and 9 months older than me. He got a priest's daughter pregnant, and they broke it off in the spring. My mom and dad got together after summer break that same year. My dad and the priest's daughter never spoke again. She was pregnant and felt shame. She hid the pregnancy, switched schools, wore baggy clothes, and had the baby after Christmas break, taking a week off school because she was sick. She gave the baby up for closed adoption and finished her schooling. My half-sister was adopted by missionaries who moved to Germany when she was 1 year old. She stayed in Germany until she was 18 and then moved back to Canada. What makes the story more intense is that since she was in Germany for so long, the Canadian doctors did not retain her adoption papers, as everything was paper back then. After 11 years of no contact with the system, her papers were destroyed. She began trying to contact her biological mother sometime after the year 2000. However, since the doctors no longer had her papers, she had to go through the Government of Canada, which took approximately 7 years to access her file. They provided her with contact information for her biological mother, who could have reached out if she chose to, as it was meant to be a closed adoption. She never got to meet our father. I have met her. We have the same general build, small feet, and she shares the same coloring as my dad and his father. So that's a significant revelation, I guess. Story 24. Not a secret, but segue is not the same as segue. I never needed to write the word segue, and I apparently never had to read it until I was 41 while reading a quote in a magazine. I only ever heard it spoken on TV. My brain only recognized segue. I have no defense other than being a Segway enthusiast when they first came out. Story 25. The reason I never met my grandfather and there were no pictures of him in our house is that he sexually assaulted my mother repeatedly while she was growing up. My mom doesn't know that I am aware of this. I accidentally found her journal from when she was in therapy and read that while trying to figure out what the notebook was. Story 26. It is much better to be competent at what you do and maintain friendly relationships with everyone you work with than to be a perfectionist who works more quickly or to a higher standard than your coworkers. This can create tension and lead to conflicts. Story 27. I did not find out about this until after my parents had both died. My dad was engaged to another woman before my mom. The other woman married a different man while my dad was serving in World War II. Story 28. My grandpa wasn't my biological grandfather. No one in the family knows who he is because my grandma never revealed it to anyone. She took that information to her grave. I would have liked to know the medical history of 1/4 of my genes. Story 29. There was a murder in the house I grew up in. I didn't find out until after I turned 50 years old, from my boyfriend's coworker who told him, and he told me. I never knew. Story 30. My mom died when I was 6. I remember a time when she was crying and saying my dad had left us when I was around 5, picturing him hiding down the street to avoid us. After my mom passed, my dad soon had a new girlfriend who became my stepmom for the next 10 years. It turns out that when my dad left, he was having an affair with my future stepmom. The situation wasn't better. He went back to my mom. My mom got cancer and passed away quickly. His partner had 2 children needing support, and he had a good income but 3 kids needing childcare. This led to an agreement that worked out for everyone for the next 10 years. Story 31. My grandmother had a partner later in life. She was called Grandma Rachel, and we all accepted her as part of the family. Everyone referred to them as friends. It later clicked when I realized that she was always at my grandmother's house and we received Christmas cards from her. Story 32. Outside the kind, liberal suburbs and schools of London where I grew up, the majority of England still exhibits significant racism. As a child, I did not care about anyone's skin color or background. Now, schools like mine and the ones I work at are criticized by right-wing individuals as examples of multiculturalism gone wrong. I wonder if they even recognize how nice these places are. Story 33. Finding a pencil case hidden behind the couch cushions revealed a collection of meth pipes. Realizing why my siblings and I experienced abuse and neglect as children, why I was often hungry and lacked food for school or textbooks when I needed them, and why we lost the house my dad worked so hard for and have been stuck in rentals and housing services ever since, is heartbreaking. My little brother died from neglect as well. Trying to escape lower-class status after sliding down from middle class is an overwhelming struggle, all because my mother chose methamphetamine and her new partner. My siblings and I were merely seen as a hindrance to her life. Story 34. Grandmother and great-aunts, who were her sisters, might have murdered their sister's husband after he killed her. This happened in the 1940s. Story 35. I was told that the women shown in Playboy were unrealistically perfect and I would be disappointed when I saw a real naked woman. I was not disappointed at all. Real women are even better, much better. Story 36. I learned that while my dad had a Doctor of Philosophy in Pharmacy and my mom a Bachelor of Science in Laboratory Science and a Master's in Education, they both struggled with financial management. Worse, they passed this financial ignorance on to me. The sad part is that they bought all the right books to educate themselves, and I have them on my shelf now, but they could never overcome their own limitations to do better. Next, despite being a belligerent drunk and mistreating us kids, getting into a knife fight with my grandfather-in-law, and so on, my dad was a deceitful coward. After being told all our lives that each of us kids would receive a third of the farm, he left it all to his stepmother in the end because he didn't want conflict with her. Story 37. I spent my entire childhood being told the Bible was the Word of God. I found out approaching adulthood that the Bible was written by men inspired by God, and men in the 300s chose which writings would become the Bible. Still baffles me. Story 38. When I'm 18, I'll have all the freedom and money to live my life. I'm 24, living with my parents and freedom? Story 39. My dad didn't have to go to another school because of his bad grades. It was because he punched a teacher after the teacher made derogatory comments about my grandfather. The social climate back then was challenging. My respect for him grew immensely. I never expected him, of all people, to do this. Unfortunately, I can't tell him that since he passed away in 2004. I learned this from my husband a few years ago, who learned it from my mom. I don't know why she never told me. My husband wasn't aware that I didn't know the true story. He just mentioned it one day, and I was shocked. Story 40. You don't have to do the right thing all the time. The grand rules that define a good person or a bad person are not as clear-cut as they seem. It's okay to question these rules, and you can let go occasionally as long as you don't hurt others. Story 41. My aunt started a women's shelter in the 1970s with good intentions. Then she became comfortable with government funding and spent a lot of it on herself, including a subway and a hair salon. Now my two cousins have land that I believe came from the fraud. She even threatened witnesses. Barbara Wingo and Anna Bixby were associated with the women's shelter in Saline County, I believe. Story 42. My dear uncle, who visited often with his wife and my favorite cousins, was a closeted gay man. When he was younger, he had been caught and shamed for his attempts to be with men, and the family kept that secret tightly locked. He married his wife and tried to make it work throughout their married lives. It must have been hard for both of them and their children, especially with the pressures from religion and the baby boomer generation. I didn't find out about this until I was in my late 30s, and so many things clicked into place once I knew. He had a terrible end of life, and I am honestly glad he no longer has to deal with being on this earth. But I loved him, he was great. Story 43. I discovered about an hour after my dad died that he was married for a few months to another woman before my mother. It didn't change anything. It was just surprising to me. Story 44. My aunt put a baby up for adoption. I only found out because my cousin came looking for the family. I recently discovered that my uncle had a one-night stand that resulted in another cousin being placed for adoption. He died over 20 years ago and never knew. This cousin came looking for us as well. I've heard that things come in threes, so I'll wait patiently for the next one. Story 45. My father accrued debt in the hundreds of thousands by swindling and defrauding banks all over the region to maintain a lifestyle far beyond his means. My grandfather had given him more than $500,000 over the years to cover his debts. Yet my father did nothing to change the situation and remained in denial. This hurt the entire family, and after my grandfather's passing, other family members were left managing my father's finances, or lack thereof. He is now under government guardianship, requiring approval for all his expenses before funds are made available. I learned about this when I was 27 while visiting my father's side of the family in another country. It significantly affected me and effectively ended the relationship I had left with him. Story 46. My family knew that my cousin was abusing his younger brother and allowed him to sleep over unsupervised at my dad's house, which felt like leaving us alone with a sign saying, "Don't bother me. I'm playing video games." I was assaulted after my cousin showed me a movie and asked if I knew what shagging was. I can't look at anything related to that franchise without feeling physically ill. Story 47. I didn't start the fire that ruined our house when I was in the 6th grade. They told me it was my fault because I left a bottle of oil by the stove. I knew I didn't because I didn't know how to cook with oil at that age. But my mom and her boyfriend insisted to the fire department that it was me, and they insisted to me that it was my fault. So I went through junior high and high school and into college believing it was me who caused the fire. It really affected me. I knew I didn't do it, but they insisted, and it was on the official paperwork. The rest of my family lost trust in me to be responsible. I got the side eye every time I stepped foot into the kitchen. I was too young to understand that it was suspicious that she hired the boyfriend, who eventually became her husband, to remodel the house. He was an out-of-work contractor at the time. As I got older, nobody bothered to tell me the truth. I only found out by accident. At dinner one night, my dad made a flippant comment about how I didn't really start the fire. I forget the context of that conversation. It was just a regular dinner-time family conversation. It took me a few seconds to understand what he had just said. I started asking questions, the main one being, "Why didn't anybody tell me?" My dad's response was, "I thought you knew already." The boyfriend, who became my mom's husband, was an awful person and destroyed her with meth. He was verbally abusive to me and physically abusive to my mom. I hated this guy. By the time I learned the truth about the fire, that it was actually him who said it and made it look like my fault, he had already died a horrible, slow, painful death from pancreatic cancer. It couldn't have happened to a better person, as far as I was concerned. Anyway, I didn't start the fire. Story 48. Something I didn't need or want to know was that my mother had been unfaithful to my father the entire time they were married, with numerous other men. For the last 10 years of their marriage, she was actively seeking relationships online. Story 49. It turns out that my mom is also a woman. Like any other woman, she has feelings. As a child, I always thought of her simply as Mom. Story 50. Man, where to start? This is a ride, buckle up. I'll hit the main details. There's much more, but these are the key points. My father physically abused my mother into 2 miscarriages before I was born. When I was almost 2, my younger brother was born. My memories from age 1 are intact because of how severe everything was. While my mother was pregnant with my brother, my father tied me to the crib and her to the bed and left us to die. Luckily, an uncle set us free. Before my brother was born, my father severely beat my mother. My brother was born so damaged that when he passed away at 1 month old, the investigation couldn't prove anything had been done to him after birth. This is secret number 1. My parents lost custody of me, and I was placed in a home. They were charged with murder, but the charges were reduced to negligence after an investigation. I was eventually turned over to my grandfather in Mexico. I was born in Texas, so I moved to Mexico and became a citizen. I lived on our estate, a large plot of land with a ranch, several aunts, uncles, and all the cousins. My youngest uncle began abusing me, not only physically but also with objects. Another uncle and aunt tried to save me and convinced their mother to never let that uncle near me, but it didn't help. I have severe Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so I'm very flexible. My uncle noticed this and would twist my legs in different directions. I could walk straight until I was much older. A year later, my father showed up with new documents, a birth certificate and social security card for me, and took me back to Texas. He found a woman working at a bar and took her home, claiming he needed someone to watch me while he worked. My grandfather, fearing for my safety, moved to Texas and got a job with my father, and we all lived together. When I was in kindergarten, my grandfather had an accident at work and passed away. This is secret number 2. Suddenly, My father bought a house and brought his stepmother and all his siblings from Mexico to live with us in Texas. That uncle immediately started abusing me again. About a year after moving in, they all moved out except for the second oldest son, my oldest uncle, who also worked with my father and grandfather and was hurt in the accident. But he eventually moved out too, and my father, new mother, and I moved to a different location and lived there from 2nd to 8th grade. My parents beat me, starved me, and kept me locked away except for school. I was never allowed to go anywhere or have anyone over, not that I was sociable or good with others. When I say beat, I mean severely beaten, not just whipped. My father is a large and strong man, and he hit me with his hands and objects. Throughout my life, I asked what happened to my brother and always got the runaround. But I had memories from age 1 and remember the beatings, all the police visits, and my brother being gone suddenly, though I wasn't there the night he died. My father was a racist narcissist who told me things like, "You'll never know what I've done for you," or "You're special. These beatings are good for you." Luckily, I never became racist. The beatings and abuse never stopped. When 9/11 happened, I was a sophomore and ran away to the Marines after high school, completing 4 tours and getting out in 2008. I tried to live my life but felt something was wrong. I couldn't shake that feeling, not just from the abuse I endured. I just had a sense that something was not right. I never saw my parents again after high school or returned home. But I eventually spoke with my father and kept asking questions. Eventually, at 38, I reached out to my birth mother's family and reconnected. Noticing their story didn't match my family's narrative about my brother. I got a copy of the autopsy and death certificate, revealing my father had beaten my brother to death, fracturing several bones and caving his face in. My birth mother covered for him. After a month of intense anger and realization, I investigated my grandfather's death. My father, his brother, and 1 or 2 men from work sabotaged my grandfather's equipment, leading to his tragic death. My new mother changed her name to match my grandmother's and collected the insurance money. This is how my father bought the first and second house and land, and paid lawyers to change my name and get new documents. My original identity was given to a cousin who still uses my birth identity today as an undocumented immigrant and has made a lot of money. When I ran away, my father claimed he and my cousin were paying me a substantial amount of money for my original identity and papers. This is untrue. I have never received a cent. In 1st grade, I had to go to the hospital for an illness, and the nurses saw the lacerations on my body. Police were called, but nothing happened. I went home with my father. In 4th grade, a boy who usually bullied me saw scars on my legs and asked what they were. I told him my father hit me with fence wire. That boy broke down in tears and told the teacher. The teacher informed the principal, who called the police, yet nothing happened. I went home again. In 8th grade, I told my father what his brother did to me as a child. He laughed and called me a liar. Imagine what he did to his brother for him to attack me like that. People aren't born monsters. They're made. I eventually reached out to the investigator of my brother's death, who was the sheriff of my hometown when I found him, but he refused to talk to me. I tried to reopen my brother's case, but they refused because I don't have the financial means. When I contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation about being trafficked, beaten, raped, and having my identity stolen, they said a person who's been victimized cannot initiate a case, as I was never reported missing. When I reached out to the Federal Communications Commission about my identity being changed and stolen, they didn't care. To summarize, my grandfather and baby brother died. The secret is that my father killed them. I'm almost 40, married, and have 3 children. I struggle with much, but I don't harm anyone. I can't work because of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, but I still managed to earn 2 degrees and a technical diploma. I tried working, but I am very anxious unless I'm at home, where I feel safe. I am a large person, standing at 6 feet 3 inches. Despite my size and amateur boxing record, I don't feel safe unless I'm home. I struggle with being touched, even by my wife and kids. Nevertheless, I've never suffered from depression or substance abuse. I don't blame myself and do not see myself as a victim. I am a survivor. Sorry, that's a lot. I love myself, and if you're a survivor too, please love yourself. Story 51. My grandmother was 3 months pregnant when she got married. On the other hand, I found out at my wedding that my grandfather wasn't my mother's biological father. Story 52. A few years ago, my dad told me that my sister is the result of an affair my mother had with his best friend. My sister does not know. Story 53. We were functionally poor. We could have received welfare, but my dad was too proud. My dad would bring home food from his friends when it actually came from the food bank. We never had any extra treats, like candies or toys. All our clothes were hand-me-downs, clearance items, or from Goodwill. I mentioned this to my mom in my 30s, and she revealed all the details. Yes, we were very poor but putting on airs because they were too proud. Story 54. I found out in my 20s that my oldest brother was one of the biggest drug dealers in town during high school, and my middle brother was his runner. Both of them left that business and now live normal lives. It drives me crazy that they both lean towards conservative views now, and one of them has said that drug dealers should be deported or executed. I just want to tell him to look in the mirror. Story 55. When I was 25, my mother admitted that the person I thought was my dad wasn't. She claims I was the result of a one-time New Year's Eve party hookup with a stranger, so my biological father is unknown. I took a DNA test through 23andMe, hoping to discover any connections, but I found literally nothing from the father's side. I grew up in what I believe to be my father's home. He and my mother divorced early on after having my younger brother. I had a difficult stepmother. Looking back, understanding that he wasn't really my dad makes all the terrible things from my childhood make more sense. Story 56. I was donor conceived. My dad was not a close biological relative. He was a great dad, a positive role model, and a loving person. I was disappointed that I wasn't informed earlier, but I understood. Story 57. I have learned two things. 1. Most adults know very little about anything and are really just learning as they go. Nobody outside of your closest family, and even that varies greatly, cares significantly about you or your life. Story 58. No matter how decent you think you are, many people will not like you, and most will be indifferent to you. Story 59. We never actually went on a family holiday to Scotland. My parents misled me as a child when I fell asleep in the car on a day trip to the local moors during the summer holidays. They claimed that we had traveled all the way to Scotland, which would have been at least a couple of hours further than the moors. This came up in polite conversation after about 30 years when I mentioned vaguely remembering a family holiday to Scotland. But my mum turned bright red and then apologized, saying I had never actually been to Scotland at all. We laughed about it for a long time. Love you, Mum. Story 60. My cousin learned that her mother had been married and divorced before she met her father. I had known about this my whole life and was unaware that she did not know. Story 61. One of the biggest secrets many people discover as adults is how much of life is about navigating uncertainty and learning through trial and error. When you are a child, adults often make it seem like there is a clear path, but as you grow, you realize that everyone is just figuring things out as they go. Life is not as straightforward as it seems when you are younger. Story 62. A surprising thought that still amazes me to this day. My dad loved old cowboy shows and movies and watched them all day every day after he retired. I found out a week after he passed away that he had been a cowboy for a year or two in between careers. He never mentioned it at all. Story 63. The song Do Your Ears Hang Low was originally a soldier's song, and they did not use the word ears. Story 64. When I was 4 or 5, my family and I went to Florida. At the beach, we found a live starfish. We brought it back to the place we were staying and kept it outside in some salt water, which was a bad idea. Unfortunately, the poor starfish died because an alligator from a local pond came up and ate almost all its legs. I was pretty upset. So the next day, we went back to the beach to find a new starfish. Within about half an hour, I came across a dead one that was fully intact. I was so proud to have found another one that I could take home. When I was 25, I told my boyfriend at the time about the story and joked with my parents about how crazy it was that I found a new starfish. It turned out they felt so bad about everything that they bought fake starfish from the store and ran ahead to the beach to place the fake one so I could find it. They ruined it for me, but it's still a funny story to tell. Story 65. I found out from my 72-year-old mother that she had her DNA tested, which indicated she had a relative. She contacted the woman, but they did not know how they were connected. She also had her mother do a DNA test. Turns out her mom is my mom's half-sister. My grandparents were married for over 50 years. My grandfather has passed away, and my grandmother is still alive. This means that at the beginning of my grandparents' marriage, my grandfather was unfaithful. This secret has been uncovered after more than 50 years. Story 66. My father, a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had a severe pornography addiction. I remember times as a child when I would come into his office to say hello, and he would immediately turn off the monitor. I was young and didn't think much about it then. 30 years later, my brother informed me about it, and everything clicked. Story 67. My mother had her intrauterine device removed without telling my father because she decided she wanted another baby, but he did not. She deceived him, and he is an abusive individual. It is difficult to learn that I only exist because of that situation. Story 68. My dad had another daughter while he was in Europe during World War II. I can only imagine what other secrets were lurking in that closet. Story 69. Not me, but my dad found out when my grandfather died that he wasn't his biological father. My grandmother had entertained soldiers during World War II and became pregnant. She didn't meet my grandfather until my dad was 3. Story 70. My childhood pet goat didn't run away. My grandpa shot it after it taunted my leash dog into strangling itself with its leash. Story 71. My parents are not married in the traditional sense. There was a degree of sexual coercion or manipulation by my father, who was already married with grown children, towards my mother, who had a significant age difference from him. This situation was settled by family elders, who arranged for my father to be with my mother and allocated his financial assets to his first wife. It seems there was also an element of Stockholm Syndrome involved, as my mother chose to be with him for reasons I do not understand. It created a significant dysfunction in our family, and I am still dealing with the aftermath. As an only child, I struggle to process these experiences. Story 72. Mom had a baby before me when she was 17 and was forced by her parents to give it up. She told me when I was 18. I have a brother somewhere. Story 73. My mother had an affair with my grandfather that lasted 1 year, and nobody knows who fathered my sister, but both my father and grandfather firmly believed it was them. Everyone in my extended family knew, aunts, uncles, cousins, as well as friends and neighbors, but nobody said a word. I found out at 30 years old after being disowned by my parents for 10 years. Story 74. We had these really relaxed neighbors who would let us come over anytime to play in the yard, watch TV, eat meals, or sleep on the couch. Then Grandpa died, and we found out he not only had 3 children out of wedlock but also arranged for them to live down the street for over 20 years. It was an open secret among my elders, but the truth came out officially at the funeral. Looking back, I should have known they were family. Nobody has neighbors that cool. Story 75. My eldest uncle is not my grandfather's biological son. My grandmother met a man who mistreated her and became pregnant. She met my grandfather while she was pregnant, and he agreed to be my uncle's father. They married shortly thereafter. I believe my uncle was legally adopted, as he has my grandfather's last name. I'm not sure if my uncle knows, but I am fairly certain my 2 cousins do not. Story 76. At no point did my parents have a definitive plan, or really any adult I knew. They did a wonderful job and I loved them, but they were making it up as they went along, battling feelings of inadequacy the whole way, just like the rest of us. Story 77. From 1971 until 1985, my parents stayed together because my mother said her father would not let her get divorced while I was around. I was born in 1968. My mother had an abortion in 1971 because she didn't want to bring another child into the marriage. There was no abuse, though my father was generally inadequate, could not hold a job, and could not manage money, yet still needed to feed his ego. They separated in 1985, but only got divorced in 1992. They insisted that I mediate the divorce settlement, so I rented a conference room in a hotel and we worked it out over the course of a day. Story 78. My dog did not run away. I was told on Christmas that she was taken and dropped off by the city lake, where she ended up being pregnant. Years later, she returned to the house while I was asleep. She jumped on me, visited for a while, and then left to return to her pack. I'm guessing. Story 79. My mom's entire side of the family are addicts, and it is not illegal to drive with the lights inside the car on. Story 80. My aunt married a man despite everyone telling her about his sexuality, and they divorced soon after. This happened when I was very young. She stated that she divorced him because he refused to work, but my mom said she would tell me the real story when I'm older. Story 81. Waiting for the weekend, not for clubbing, playing sports, or sightseeing, just to recharge and prepare to do it all again on Monday. Story 82. My wealthy grandparents were actually drowning in debt to maintain appearances. All those fancy vacations, private schools, and designer clothes were funded by credit cards and loans. I discovered this when I had to help sort out their finances after my grandfather passed away. The surprising part? They lectured us about living within our means while secretly refinancing their house for the third time. This experience really changed how I view money and family myths. Story 83. Being married doesn't really mean anything. When I was young, I thought marriage meant that your relationship was perfect. Now that I am married, I realize we are just two people doing our best. We are not indestructible. Story 84. I shouldn't hurry to grow up and should soak in the beauty and carelessness of my youth. Story 85. I never understood why we didn't see my grandfather often. I can count on one hand how many times I saw him as a child, and we were never left alone with him. If one of my aunts took us to his kitchen to make a drink, she would call us in with some excuse. Then, when I was 17, my mother was drunk and let slip about my grandfather. He not only beat my father and his siblings savagely, as well as my grandmother, but he also assaulted my aunts regularly because they resembled my grandmother. Everyone cut contact for years until we, the grandchildren, were born. I don't know why they got back in contact, but it was minimal and we rarely saw him. He died in his sleep after years of alcoholism, and we only found out when the police called to ask some of my aunts and uncles to come to my grandfather's house so they could break in. We had no idea what he was doing in his life, but his neighbors noticed that they hadn't seen him in days and raised the alarm. My uncle laughed at the fact that the neighbors were crying their eyes out while his own children, the grandchildren, were stone-faced and shrugged it off. The neighbors didn't know what he truly was. Story 86. I discovered in my early 20s that my father had several other children, none of whom I was aware of. He had also spent time in prison for car theft. I knew my parents divorced before I was 5 because my father couldn't stop pursuing other women. He was a notorious womanizer and had no morals when it came to relationships. According to some of his partners, he was very well endowed and skilled in the bedroom. There were rumors he had participated in adult films in the 1960s and 1970s. Knowing him, I don't doubt it. After his death, my brother found one of his little black books while going through his belongings. There were over 500 names in one book, complete with dates, ratings, and preferred activities. The date range covered about 15 years, indicating there were likely others. I am sure he had at least 3 other children, and it's very likely there are more. 2 of the 3 were with married women whose husbands were unaware. I know about the other child. She is the daughter of one of his girlfriends, with whom he had an on and off relationship throughout their lives. At my father's funeral, there were more than 24 women present whom neither I nor my family recognized. The youngest one I spoke with was in her 20s, and I suspect she might be another one of his children I didn't know about. The rest were most likely former partners. Story 87. My parents told me that my grandfather had become ill and passed away suddenly before I was born. However, it turns out that my aunt finally revealed the truth when I was an adult. He was gay and died during the AIDS epidemic. Story 88. My mom was an alcoholic until I was 7. My dad threatened to take us kids and leave her if she didn't get sober. I didn't find out until I was 19, and only because one of my older siblings told me. Everything in our family was a secret. Story 89. I found out shortly after graduating high school that my guinea pig Gus wasn't the original Gus. Turns out the air conditioning broke in our house one hot summer day. We were away, and by the time we got back, he had passed. The cat survived by staying near a cracked window that let in cool air. She was a previous alley cat and was very street smart. My parents, not wanting to explain the concept of death to 4-year-old me, put a blanket over him and told me he was asleep. They drove to a family friend's house who raised guinea pigs and managed to get one that was the same color, but was a ruffle coat instead of smooth. Little me didn't know, and the only memories I have are of Gus 2.0. My mom made a remark about me being gullible at times, saying, "When we replaced your guinea pig after he died with another one, wait, Gus wasn't the real Gus." That shook my world that day. Story 90. My mother told me my father had died when I was 5. Upon her death when I was 12, I was sent to live in Germany with an unkind uncle. Once there, I discovered my father was not only alive and well but lived just around the corner my whole life. He watched me go to school each day and had been told by my mother that I did not want any contact with him. We got back in touch and I went to live with him, enjoying a very happy life until he passed away 12 years ago. Story 91. After my mother died when I was an adult, I discovered that my father had died when I was a baby. It turned out that my mother's ex-husband from her first marriage had never filed the divorce papers as he was supposed to in the 1950s. As a result, my mother was never legally divorced from her first husband, making her marriage to my father null and void. This information came to light because my father's adult daughter from his previous marriage contested his will, leaving my mother and me destitute. I hope you enjoyed that dining room set you wanted so badly, half-sister. Story 92. Even though I suspected something like this, my dad confided in me that he wasn't my biological father. I was 3 years old when my parents met. This was after my mother died of cancer and I have cancer as well. It was pretty obvious. I am 6 feet 1 inch tall with a gentle, quiet nature, while my dad is anything but. My dad, an immigrant from England, raised me with love in a manner that few biological fathers can emulate. Thank you, Dad, and we will all meet again. May you rest in peace until then, you deserve the rest. Story 93. Secrets or bold-faced lies. Santa, indigenous people were portrayed as savages. Religion still waits for people to reap what they sow. I can go on and on. I feel like everything we were taught was a lie. Everyone has an agenda. Story 94. That the baby boomers are completely misinformed. They do not know what is happening. However, they always present themselves as though they know everything. Another point is that I felt unwanted. There was an incident behind a bowling alley, a place I am familiar with because I have bowled there. They had arranged for an abortion, but my Christian grandmother convinced them not to proceed. I think I did not want to live. I even hung myself with the umbilical cord. The first thing I experienced in life was death, which is ironic. However, I do believe this experience has allowed my mind to perceive things differently. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.